Starting us off like we always do, with number 10, we have sodomy. This is a very common thing that occurs in prisons all over the world. A lot of inmates are abused on a daily basis by other aggressive inmates or prison gangs that are trying to gain power and control. There are even some cases of prison guards abusing their authority and sodomizing the inmates. This is a cruel and unforgivable form of punishment that actually occurs a lot more than you guys would think. Hog tying and other forms of physical torture makes its way into number 9 on this list. Hog tying, what the heck is that? Well, hog tying looks like this. Your wrists and ankles are tied together. This is extremely uncomfortable, and many times prisoners are left like this for hours. There are even situations where mentally ill patients would be tied up like this and they would just be naked, denied water and food for hours. There are also left to stand, sit, or lie naked in their own feces or urine, and they are denied shower privileges for days. Number 8 brings us to force-fed drugs. There was a very controversial and highly secretive government program that basically revolves around trying to control people's minds. The scientists involved with this program decided it would be a good idea to test the effects of LSD on unsuspecting prison inmates because they figured no one cares what happened to the inmates anyway, so why not? So they gave the LSD to inmates and they would fight back and they wouldn't tell them what the drug was. In one case, a mentally ill patient was doped with LSD for 174 straight days. Neutral loaf comes into number 7. We've all heard that prison food is terrible, but this is arguably one of the most disturbing food that has ever been given to another human being. I mean, this is basically the worst thing that prison can legally give the prisoners without it constituting as abuse. Sure, it has all the nutrients that your body needs to survive, but apparently it's super disgusting. The prisoners get to choose between a week of Nutriloaf meals or spend a week in solitary confinement. Most of them pick solitary confinement. Next up, number 6, we have almost beaten to death. There have been many reports of prisoners being drastically abused by the prison guards almost to the point that they are unrecognizable. Sometimes there are corrupt correctional officers that will allow gangs or other inmates to beat each other almost to the point of death, or they'll take the prisoners away from the cameras and they'll do it themselves. Solitary confinement makes its way into number 5 on this list. This is probably the worst form of psychological torture. No one wants to be sent to the hole. Prisoners in solitary confinement spend 22 to 24 hours a day in a small cell with barely any human contact. Many inmates spend years or even decades cut off from any real social interactions. This extreme isolation can permanently affect their emotional and mental health. They quickly become paranoid and more prone to violence and hallucinations. Albert Woodfox spent 43 years in solitary confinement, so I guess you could say that he was tortured for over 4 decades. I mean, is this real life right now? Number 4 brings us to white noise torture. This is the sound that you get when you don't tune your device to the correct channel. Here's a little sample of that. This is probably one of the most annoying sounds in the world, so just imagine if you were forced to listen to this for long periods of time. I mean, no, I couldn't imagine this. You'd probably go insane and you'd be so sleep deprived. Tiger cages are at number 3. This cruel and unusual form of punishment is absolutely terrifying. Some prisons will use tiger cages for punishing the prisoners. These cages are made out of barbed wires and they have just enough space for the prisoners to lay or sit down inside of. In these cages, the prison guards will torment the prisoner by pouring cold water on them at night, pouring salt water into or lighting a fire near the tiger's cages during hot days. Number 2 takes us to cancer injections. Back in the 1950s, scientists wanted to inject prisoners with cancer to study how their bodies would react. Even though all of the prisoners were volunteers, I'm sure they weren't told how dangerous and how life-threatening this experiment would be. They were probably told that they would get time reduced off of their sentence or, compensated in one way or another. Either way, this is a very immoral and highly unethical. Finally, number 1, we have being left to die. I mean, of course we left this to number 1. Sometimes when a criminal commits an extremely awful crime, there are certain police officers that try to take justice into their own hands. There was a case of one man named Adolph Archie who shot and murdered a police officer. Well, he was in need of medical attention himself because he had been shot, but instead of sending him to the hospital, hospital, they brought him to jail, and within a few hours he was dead. All of his teeth were shattered, his skull was fractured, and he had severe hemorrhaging in his testicles. So he had been beaten to death by an angry mob of police officers, and I bet this wasn't the first time that something like this has happened. Starting off like we always do, and at number 10, we're talking about the major theme of this experiment: sleep deprivation. According to the tale, the prisoners were locked up in a gas chamber where a form of experimental gas was pushed through the vents in order to prevent them from sleeping. It was the goal of this experiment to observe all of their behaviors and conversations through a one-way mirror to see how sleep deprivations would affect humans. The intent was to keep them awake for a period of 30 days, which is absolutely insane. The long-term effects of sleep deprivations are quite severe. It drains your mental abilities and can definitely cause irreversible physical health risks. According to one study, sleep deprivation can cause memory issues, trouble with concentration, mood swings, increased risk of accidents, weakened immunity, high blood pressure, risk for diabetes, weight gain, low libido, risk of heart disease, poor balance, and many other health risks. So how much sleep should the average adult be getting each night? Well, for me, I think 15 hours a night is good, but for regular people, it's about 7 to 9 hours per night. That's like the amount of sleep you need to be able to function at your best. This is something that these political prisoners were deprived of. The gas chamber brings us to number 9. So what were the living conditions inside of this cold, dark chamber? Well, the 5 prisoners were kept locked inside of a sealed gas chamber that would continuously administer a stimulant gas that was designed to keep them awake. However, this gas was highly concentrated with a ton of toxins. The experiment was conducted during the 1940s, so it was a time before we had circuit cameras. The researchers only had microphones and 5-inch thick glass porthole windows that was used to monitor the test subjects. The gas chamber was nothing like the Hilton. It was stocked with old books, cots, but no bedding, running water, or a toilet. They also had enough dried food to last all 5 of them over a month. Why would anyone agree to participate in this experiment? Well, these 5 prisoners had a lengthy prison sentence, and they were told that if they participated, they would be pardoned, but now we know that that was a lie. Rebellion comes crashing into this list at number 8. The test subjects managed to behave normally for the first couple of days. They could be seen talking and whispering to each other, so the researchers had nothing to really worry about until one day when a test subject began to scream uncontrollably, and the other prisoners tried to prevent the researchers from looking inside of the gas chamber. They started to paste torn book pages and feces on the windows and the one-way mirror so that the researchers couldn't study what was happening.
I demand the papers removed from the window! Felix! Remove the paper!
A few days passed without the researchers being able to see inside, so they tried to use the intercom to see if the subjects, to see if they were still alive. They managed to get a short response from one of the subjects who wanted to be obedient. The first death comes onto this list at number 7. Let's rewind to that patient who was screaming uncontrollably. It was on the 9th day of the experiment when he started to repeatedly scream at the top of his lungs for 3 hours straight. He continued to attempt to scream, but he would only let little squeaks, and that's because the scientists believe that he had physically torn his own vocal cords from screaming too much. But the most surprising thing is what happened after he tore his vocal cords. The other test subjects continued whispering into the microphones, and that's when they started to cover up the windows, and once the researchers could no longer see inside of the chamber, that's when the screaming suddenly stopped. Moving into number 6 with the 15th day of the experiment. This was the day when the researchers decided to turn off the stimulant gas and reopen the chamber. I feel like when they opened the door, it probably looked like a scene from I Am Legend or The Walking Dead. So when they looked inside of the torture chamber, inside of the gas chamber, they discovered the 4 surviving subjects. 2 of them had mutilated and removed some of their own organs. They even went as far as tearing off their flesh and muscles and eating them. So keep in mind that this was only halfway through the experiment. They had another 15 days to go, and at this this rate, none of them were expected to survive the experiment. Never wanting to leave brings us to number 5. When the researchers opened the chamber, they had fully intended to give these prisoners some basic medical attention. I mean, yeah, gee, thanks. But oddly enough, the test subjects violently refused to leave, and they actually begged the scientists to continue administering the stimulant. I guess the researchers had some basic decency because they knew that they couldn't keep the prisoners in the cell anymore. But when soldiers came in to remove the subjects from the chamber, the remaining 2 survivors murdered one of the soldiers and severely injured another. The female test subject was accidentally killed by a soldier, but attempted to restrain her. He lost his grips and her head bashed against the concrete wall. Okay, what the heck is in this stimulant? And why are these prisoners too reluctant to leave their cell? Well, let's explore the stimulant gas in at number 4. As soon as the researchers flushed the stimulant gas and filled it with fresh air, the test subjects immediately begged for them to turn on the gas. The contents of the stimulant gas have never been revealed for obvious reasons, even though there is a lot of controversy surrounding this experiment and people believe that this is only a story. There are still people who believe that the Russian sleep experiment is a huge government conspiracy and they're hiding the truth from us. Let me know what you guys believe in the comment section below. Some people even believe that the government is trying to replicate this gas to use it in some sort of future chemical warfare. Number 3 takes us to life outside of the gas chamber. The surviving 3 test subjects were heavily restrained and moved to a private medical facility. They kept begging for gas, and to be kept awake, the most injured test subject was taken to an operating room so that the surgeons could replace his organs back inside of his body. But once they tried to administer the sedatives, they realized that he was immune to a lot of the drugs. Eventually they managed to put him under with the anesthesia, but as soon as he was sleeping, his heart stopped. He died on the operating table, and during an autopsy, it was found that he had triple the normal levels of oxygen in his system. The other 2 subjects had surgery as well, but no anesthetic. However, the surgeon found it impossible to operate on them because they were laughing hysterically throughout the whole procedure. As soon as they went to sleep, they died, and this brings us to number 2. It seems as though the remaining test subjects were no longer human. The gas stimulant changed them, and there was no denying that the fact that these test subjects could no longer live in society. So the researchers concluded that they should be sealed in the chamber again, but this time they would be connected to an EEG monitor and restrained. The subjects were monitored by 3 researchers, and they noticed that as soon as their brainwaves changed to a deep sleep state, he would flatline and his heart would immediately stop. The last volunteer makes it onto this list at number 1. The commander gave orders to have the chamber sealed permanently with the last 2 subjects inside, as well as the 3 researchers. But one of the researchers drew his gun and shot the commander right between his eyes, then turned the gun on one of the test subjects and blew his brains out. He went to point the gun at the last surviving test subject, who was still restrained to the bed, but before he shot him, the researchers asked, "What are you?" "I need to know." The subject smiled and said, "We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralysis when you go to the nocturnal haven where you cannot tread." I mean, whoa, did anyone else get the chills there? I'm definitely going to get my full 9 hours of sleep tonight because I don't want to go through any of this. I don't want to be transformed into whatever they were transformed into.
Starting off this countdown, we have the gas-resistant stroller. When you go out for a walk with the little guys right now, you might throw them in a stroller. It's probably the easiest way to get from A to B without having to wait for the little kids to catch up. They always want to stop and pick up a rock that's smooth. Like, what is it with smooth rocks that seem so cool? Anyways, back in the day when there was a concern about chemical attacks, a gas-resistant stroller was made. The gas-resistant stroller was what looks like a metal coffin on wheels. It was all the rage when mustard gas wasn't yet a war crime. It would pair nicely with a gas mask that your mom could wear as she pushed you through the streets. Honestly, it's pretty terrifying, not gonna lie. I'm glad that this isn't a thing anymore. Over to you, Rachel.
Coming in at number 9, the Fliz. You know that one of the safest parts about riding a bike is the fact that you can get into any sort of accident and you're not attached to it. You can kind of just fly off and jump off before you land in a mud puddle or scrape your knee or whatever. Another great part of a bike is that it has pedals and gears so you can move much faster than if you were running or walking, which is kind of the idea. Even if you're out of shape and you haven't done a lot of cardio, like the people who get up at 4 a.m. and go for runs, oh my god, those people are like on another tier. They're like gods. then you can definitely go really fast on a bike if you want to. And what on earth is a flizz? This thing is what happens when you mix a jolly jumper with a bike and are willing to look embarrassing for everyone to see. The flizz is a bike with no pedals, so you have to push with your feet like a Flintstone. And now this obviously sucks because you wouldn't really be able to move very fast at all. They also built a harness into it so you can hang in there like you're some sort of baby Bjorn. Usually when you invent a new thing, the goal is to try and make it better than the last version of said thing instead of making it worse or really stupid. So I don't think the guy who strolls in on the flizz is going to have a swarm of men or women around them being like, oh my god, marry me, I love you, because they look so sexy. They'll probably be looking at him being like, what? Is he okay? And how do you go uphill with this thing? You have to just run up the hill as you're attached to a bike? What is the point of being the bike then?
In our 8th spot, we have bat bombs. Yeah, not bath bombs, bat bombs. This next one is not only terrifying, but also deadly. When it comes to warfare, people can get pretty inventive. Imagine you're stalking past enemy lines in the dead of night, when all of a sudden, a web-winged furry creature swoops in and drops a bomb right at your feet. Bat bombs were an experimental weapon developed in World War II, and they are exactly as they sound. It was a bat with a bomb attached to it. This would detonate on or near enemies. The plan was developed and submitted by Lytle S. Adams, a dentist from Irwin, Pennsylvania. He presented his idea to the White House just 2 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor, and they liked it and the project was greenlit. The doc assembled an oddball team, including a pilot turned actor, an ex-gangster, and an ex-hotel manager. The project was disbanded in 1943 because it was surpassed by a deadlier project. Stay tuned for that one later on in the list.
Coming in number 7, we have the Urban Baby Window Cage. I can definitely see how this is appealing. Like, you want to make sure your baby gets a lot of fresh air, but you don't have time to take them for a walk when they're young. The Urban Window Baby Cage was basically a chain link cage with a pillow inside of it. So you could just plop your baby inside and go, look, a bird. Jimmy? Apparently everyone back then would have been totally fine with Michael Jackson dangling his baby outside his window because that's what they all did, apparently. The purpose of this contraption was so that your baby could get a little fresh air because you don't want your baby to get all stuffy in your New York apartment that's the size of a shoebox. And this was in a time when elevators were both scarce and the chance of them killing you was much higher. Think Tower of Terror, but real life. So walking that potentially very chubby baby up and down 30 flights of stairs doesn't seem very fun as just hanging him outside a window so you can feel the sun in his face and hear all the slurs that New York construction workers offer to the patrons on the sidewalks. If your kid ever gets out of line, you can just throw them in the cage for a timeout. You know? That's, this is why we should forget this. It's not a good idea, guys. Let's just stick with, like, jolly jumpers and cribs that are inside. That sounds like a better idea.
In our 6th spot, we have the hydrogen blimps. Hydrogen blimps are labeled as one of the worst inventions of all time. Basically, it was like a big balloon in the sky. It would be pushed by propellers, and guess what they would put into the balloon to make it float? Hydrogen. Hydrogen was cheaper and more readily available, so they used it. Just there's one tiny issue with that. It was highly flammable. But they would pile people into this blimp that was fueled by hydrogen. And sadly, they would explode. In 1937, the Hindenburg, a German airship, caught fire and crashed in 36 seconds. It was very sad and very disastrous. But that wasn't even the first time that one exploded. Just after the Hindenburg, that's when people were like, "Okay, maybe this isn't safe." Now, history should never be forgotten. But maybe let's just never bring back hydrogen blimps, okay?
Coming in at number 5, we have plastic. I acknowledge that plastic has helped us get this far. It has been an important part of our development as a species. But just like when a young adult who has to shed their trauma that made them funny, but keep the funny, it's time for us to move on from the thing that is choking our planet. Like, if you go outside right now and get a box of tea, the tea will come in a box that is wrapped in plastic. The box is already a container for the tea. Why are we double wrapping it, you know? I know the purpose is to increase the shelf life, but maybe we shouldn't be keeping things on shelves that long. Maybe? I don't know. We should seek out healthier food that doesn't last as long because it doesn't have as many preservatives. Thus, it would be stupid to wrap it in plastic. Just wrap it in paper. Or pour it into my hands. I don't know. Just do it. Or have no packaging and everyone just goes to bulk barns and puts it in glass jars and everything like that. I think that's a pretty good idea, but, you know, who knows. The plastic, it lasts a little too long. Let's just say that.
In our fourth spot, we have the brazen bull. This is one of history's most horrific inventions. The brazen bull was a torture device used in ancient Greece around 560 BC. A seaside colony called Ocrigus was ruled over by a man named Phalaris. This device was commissioned for him. He wanted to turn torture into music. His court sculpture created this unique nightmarish piece. It was a hollow sculpture of a bull with bells and whistles attached, and there was enough room for the victim to be placed inside of it. The bull would then be placed over a roaring fire, and instead of screams, it was designed to sound like the grunts of a bull. Now, some say this invention was a myth, but famed poet Cicero states that, in fact, the bull did exist and was used. This remains one of the most evil inventions in history.
Coming in at number 3, we have the tricho system. There are plenty of ways to get rid of hair in places you don't want them to be. There's waxing, shaving, electrolysis, but this one invention deserves to be mentioned just one more time before we let history completely forget it. Never do this again. The tricho system was a hair removal device that became a must-have in every salon in the 1920s, and actually worked. It would remove the hair painlessly and effortlessly. All you had to do was sit at a mahogany desk and face a small window. When the flip was switched, there was no burning, just a slight hum from the machine. But it had some horrendous side effects. Yes, it would remove all the hair, but soon men and women would develop cancerous ulcers, carcinoma, and death. The reason? They were using X-ray technology, which is, as we know, radioactive. It would be administered to the skin for a few minutes and require anywhere between 15 to 20 treatments to be effective. X-ray technology was used for a variety of skin treatments around the time, and even in the late 1800s, like for ringworm and eczema. But when the tricho machine was released, however, there was no mention of what the technology they were using was. They were just like, the tricho miracle. You know, just picture like a typical 1920s ad. And the person administering it wasn't well qualified and didn't know what it was either. They just were like, flip switch, and it works. Clients were just marveled that it worked so well until it slowly burned their faces off. Of course, hindsight is 2020. How they were to know. Let's just put this embarrassing, dangerous blunder to the side, shall we?
In our second spot, we have Agent Orange. This next one we're going to talk about should kind of be remembered so that no one ever does anything so awful ever again. Agent Orange was a pesticide that was responsible for 400,000 fatalities, disabilities, and 500,000 birth defects. It was invented by plant biologist Arthur Galston in 1943. He created it as a way to help accelerate the growth of soybeans in places with a short growing season. But in large doses, it actually destroyed crops, and the US decided to take this technology and abuse it. During the War of Vietnam, they sprayed the land, and 4.5 million acres of crops in Vietnam were destroyed by Agent Orange. And any exposure the Vietnamese and US, Australian, and New Zealand soldiers had to this pesticide came with deadly consequences. It caused an abnormal amount of miscarriages, extreme birth defects, cancer, and skin conditions. Some of the land still can't even be used to this day. It's very tragic and scary.
Coming in at number 1, we have the atom bomb. If the name Robert Oppenheimer doesn't ring any bells, maybe this will. Coming in at number 1, we have the atomic bomb. See, there it is. Robert Oppenheimer invented the atomic bomb, and the first one that successfully detonated created a mushroom cloud 40,000 feet high. What people did with this new invention, however, stole an unfathomable amount of lives and opened doors for even more deadly weapons. It also led to one of the most terrifying standoffs in history during the 1960s called the Cuban Missile Crisis. The USA and Soviet Russia were caught in a standoff both with nukes pointing at each other, waiting for the other to press the big red button. Thankfully, neither did, but many countries have nukes in their arsenal, ready to strike whenever they want, and they're also still used in a lot of battles and war today. Considering how much damage was done to Nagasaki and Hiroshima due to the detonations of Fat Man and Little Boy in 1945, oh man, I hope that day never comes, and they should just get rid of them. Like, no country should just have them, because we definitely know that it will lead to the destruction of the world if they're ever used. We just should make an agreement that get rid, we forget, destroy all the ways of making them, just let's get rid. Albert Einstein was the man who prompted the USA to invent the atom bomb in order to combat the Germans in World War II. He believed the Germans were working on the bomb as well, but he found out too late that that wasn't the case, and they weren't even as far as he thought they were. He immediately regretted his decision, which is why the atomic bomb makes our list of inventions we should all forget. Just get rid of it. He's not the only one who wished it never existed. He's not the only one who wished it never existed. We should just get rid of it. Like, what?